Hello, and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I'm your other host, Andrei Kurenkov. On this episode, we'll be diving into our usual mix of applications and business stories, research and advancements, and society and ethics. Some of these stories will be about Cruise's robot car outages happening in San Francisco, Google introducing a new model named Minerva for solving math questions, and some coverage over the fight over which uses of AI Europe should outlaw. And we'll finish up with a fun story about a cute desktop robot.
So our first article in Applications and Business is Cruise's robot car outages are jamming up San Francisco. And this article is talking about how Internally Wired actually found out that nearly 60 Cruise vehicles were disabled across SF over a 90-minute period, and they actually lost touch with the Cruise server. And something as many as 20 cars, some of them were actually in crosswalks, created a jam in SF downtown area. And this incident was first reported by the SF Examiner, and also there were some posts on Reddit. And, this outage wasn't Cruise's first. Cruise also had a problem on May 18th, about a month ago, where this happened as well. They lost touch for about 20 minutes there. And what's really scary is that actually these cars were just stuck and they were just stopped. And, while they were able to, move over as part of, some kind of fallback system, people did report actually some of them did not budge at all. And, there was this huge, basically robot car blockade. And this causes, a lot of different problems, obviously delayed everyone, but was actually kind of scary, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is crazy because you can imagine if you have emergency vehicles, right, cruising at high speeds to try to get somewhere, this could very easily lead to a crash. And what's even crazier is this happened only a few weeks, maybe 4 weeks after Cruise got the permission to launch its commercial service where anyone in the SF can take one of these Cruise cars that don't have a driver, so they're completely driverless, to basically have something like an Uber towards different parts of the city. So this is like an hour and a half of complete outage. And there was, like the article discusses, there was a person inside one of these cars. And the car stopped, and this person was just, mystified. So definitely a big deal and a definite blow to Cruise, I can imagine. And wow, what a weird incident.
Yeah, and Cruise actually couldn't even contact the person or the people inside of those Cruise cars, so that's not great. And the article does note that losing connection with its vehicles and especially its backup safety systems might actually violate their permit to operate in California. That's still TBD, but that this could be the end of it as well.
Yeah, and also I believe in this article, an employee at Cruise who remained anonymous kind of commented that losing connection is something that happens not infrequently. So it has happened before, and it happens. So it's, pretty shocking because it's a very basic thing. And it's not like a huge fleet. It's, a couple dozen cars. So for them to just completely stop because of losing connection to a server, and be unable to fall back on any kind of local code, something like that, that is just very hard to imagine. And, obviously it makes it hard to believe that Cruise is really building a robust product. And on to our second article, we have Japan's forestry industry tests robots to address labor shortage. So the story covers how the Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute worked with Southbound Corporation to use robots produced by Boston Dynamics to help people with, basically scouting and maintaining forests. So this is motivated by there pretty much being a lack of labor for this area of work. It's very manual, and the people who typically have done it are aging, and there's fewer and fewer workers. So the hope here is that these kinds of robots will be able to help with essentially monitoring and carrying some cargo throughout forests. And they have this demonstration that they ran and are now continuing to run, I suppose, in two other areas in Japan.
And specifically, they're going to be using Wi-Fi and satellite communication, so the robots can actually be linked and they can actually operate in the woods where there's no reception.
And these, for reference, are the yellow dog-like robots. So they walk around the forest as you've seen before and can see stuff and carry stuff on their back, which is kind of cute.
So this might just yet be a useful case for the Boston Dynamics robot. We'll see. I know they've been struggling with that.
Yeah, I agreed. It's we still haven't seen too many Boston Dynamics robots out there in the wild, and this is certainly out there in the wild. So it'll be interesting to see if this actually goes beyond the trial phase and becomes part of how the forestry industry in Japan operates.
Very cool. And on to our lightning round. First article is FIFA will track players' bodies using AI to make offside calls at 2022 World Cup. And this is going to be a semi-automated system with AI. And it's going to have a sensor in the ball that looks up the position on the field 500 times a second and 12 tracking cameras mounted underneath the roof of the stadiums that use AI to track 29 points on the players' bodies.
It's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data to make these offside calls.
Yeah.
But people care about that, so we'll see. Next article is Words Matter. AI can predict salaries based on the text of online job postings. And so this is using the words of a data set of more than 1 million online job postings, and they're able to use AI to explain 87% of the variation in salaries across a huge part of the labor market.
Interesting result, although I guess you would hope that AI could predict general salary ranges for different career paths.
Yeah, it doesn't seem actually like a super hard task, but yeah.
Maybe there's nuance to it. I don't know. And for other lightning stories, we have photographer successfully uses Dall-E 2 AI to edit his photos. So we've talked about Dall-E 2 a bunch, and one of its features is not just generating images based on text, but also editing images based on text. And so here, he was able to fix an autofocus photograph by kind of filling in details that were missing.
Which is great because I take a lot of autofocus photographs.
And many of us do, I'm sure. It's going to be the next filters, fill in the missing part here. And last up, we have Google engineer identifies anonymous faces in World War II photos with AI facial recognition. So while visiting the Poland Museum in 2016, this engineer, Daniel Pat, realized that he could be walking by images of his own relatives without knowing it. So he designed this platform that could go from images of people where you only see the number that were assigned during World War II to actually get to identity. So an interesting sort of historical restoration project or something of that sort with AI.
And on to our research and advancement section. First article is Google AI introduces Minerva, a natural language processing NLP model that solves mathematical questions. All right, so this is about the new Google paper around Minerva, which is this language model that can use sequential reasoning, so any kind of language model that does sequential reasoning to answer math problems. And specifically, this is important because state-of-the-art models have been struggling with quantitative reasoning, such as math, science, or engineering problems. And so to close this gap, Minerva is here, pre-trained on general natural language data, so general English, general understanding of language, and then it's trained on, further fine-tuned on technical content. So not a very surprising set of techniques to get this model to work well on these undergraduate level problems in physics, biology, chemistry, economics, and other sciences, but a very interesting direction to be taking this.
Yeah, exactly. They note that the main novelty of a paper is the large training set that juxtaposes natural language with these equations and diagrams. So really, they just applied the GPT-3 type approach, but with new data, where this data was taken from scientific papers from arXiv. They got 118 gigabytes worth of scientific papers in these mathematical formats of LaTeX and others, which is a lot. 118 gigabytes of PDFs, or even not PDFs, text files is more than I would have expected could be used here. And these results are pretty impressive. This is a challenging benchmark, basically SAT type problems. And this is a huge leap in performance from, I think, about a few percent to over 50%, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and just a note on the evaluation, since the leap was so big, they asked the model to reason through it step by step in a way, and then give a final answer. And they're able to compare the final answer, but they actually cannot. They're not verifying whether the steps were correct, the reasoning that the model actually made. So that's one little tidbit around the evaluation that's important here to know.
Yeah, I would say I'm still a little pretty impressed that it seems like if they primarily fine-tuned on these scientific paper data set, then it's not like these papers have high school math questions, right? They just has general math notation. So if indeed it was just training on this scientific paper data, it's kind of interesting that it actually did transfer to solving high school math type problems. And on to our next article, we have a year in the making, BigScience's AI language model is finally available. So this article is covering the release of Bloom, which is a language model roughly the size of GPT-3, actually 176 billion parameters, so just a bit bigger. And what's different about it from GPT-3 is that it was done by kind of grassroots organization, you could say, called BigScience. So it's a collaboration between different organizations that isn't so much a company such as OpenAI, but is rather a more kind of open collaboration among a whole bunch of researchers. I think it was a giant team of more than 1,000 researchers from 60 countries and more than 250 institutions. So all of them work together to create this very large, multilingual, large language model, which is a big deal because, as we've seen, mostly things like OpenAI and Google and other large industry players have been able to train these large language models. So this is a case where academia can actually start and is starting to also participate on that scale.
And BigScience is very much bootstrapped by Hugging Face, who also has released a free web app that lets you try Bloom without having to download it. So it's very in line with what Hugging Face wants to make available to the world.
Yeah, exactly. And they also have some other statements here that researchers will have the ability to use Bloom for less than $40 per hour on a cloud provider, which is pretty cool. But they also are working on a less hardware-intensive version of Bloom so that you could just run it locally. So definitely kind of a welcome development with a lot of people in academia having been feeling a bit of stress over basically industry having control over some of the most impactful models in recent years.
And on to our lightning round. Meta open sources early stage AI translation tool that works across 200 languages. So Meta actually created a model that can translate across 200 different languages, including many that aren't actually supported by the commercial tools out there. And Meta is actually open sourcing this project so that people can build on top of this work. The next article is Computer Scientists' Interactive Program Aids Motion Planning for Environments with Obstacles. So robots can't see through walls, and sometimes they need some help. So engineers at Rice University actually developed a method that allows humans to help robots, quote unquote, see their environments and carry out tasks.
Yeah, so now you can help your robot actually achieve what you want as opposed to getting lost and getting stuck. And one more, we have Microsoft AI researchers open source GODEL, a large-scale pre-trained language model for Dialog. So yet another open-sourced large language model. Wow, quite a few of them today. So here we see that Microsoft has released this grounded open dialogue language model, pretty much similar to something like Siri or Alexa. These are language models that are optimized to be a sort of chatbot assistant to answer questions or help with making appointments and things like that. So pretty cool to see this being open sourced.
All right, on to our society and ethics section. Given all this open source madness, we can only imagine this section to grow in the future. So the first article is Fake Friends and the Real Threat of AI-Generated Influencers. All right, so there are some fake Instagram influencers that are, generated by AI, and the latest one is Kira, and she only has 23 posts, but she has 113,000 followers. That's KYRA. And there are other ones, including Lil Michaela, who we've mentioned before, with 3 million followers, Shudu, Blocko, and Emma. And so these all, have a little bit of authenticity or try to be authentic in their posts. But what's interesting here is that Kira's creator, Himanshu Gal, who is the business head at Top Social India, he wrote that, quote, since her first post, she has traveled to the mountains, beaches, and forests of Jaipur. She has done a fashion shoot, Valentine's Day interaction with fans, and even yoga. Kira's journey has just begun, and there are many more adventures and secrets to be revealed.
Yeah, wow. I don't know. What do you think about this, Sharon? Do you think this is actually going to lead to a lot of influencers on Instagram, these kinds of AI characters?
Well, I think it's starting to, right? And I think the article notes that this could be very dangerous for kids who are already, or just generally young people, anyone who's already comparing themselves to influencers that are real, and now there's fake influencers, and that's like another step beyond Photoshop, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point, that this is already to some extent the truth that people are using filters, so you're getting one step away from reality with kind of AI making you more perfect looking by some standards. People also have been caught photoshopping themselves, traveling to different destinations So there's been that, and now you can just generate any sort of scene with AI directly. And because you're using advanced technology, it looks photorealistic enough to, I guess, catch people's eyes. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting time if these are actually going to be, a big phenomena. I guess it's worth noting that there are actual people running these accounts, so it's not so much independent sort of AIs making all these posts and deciding on what to post. There are people like Himanshu Goel who are basically using AI to create all these images and do all this posting. So it's more like using Photoshop to create some sort of persona than kind of creating some sort of actual character driven by AI or anything.
What's interesting is that you don't have to look a certain look to be a popular influencer on Instagram now. Like, you could just create a new persona and make that persona very popular. And I know a lot of people have kind of different identities online. And so this is, I guess, another form of that kind of identity.
Yeah. It's an interesting story. It has quite a bit of detail. This is from WebMD. So we will link to it as usual in the description. And it does link quite a bit to other stories you've touched on, like using AI for photo shoots for models to kind of not actually require real people. Now you can make your ads with AI. So I guess we're going to just see a lot of synthetic humans in a lot of places in the coming years, maybe is the overall message. And on to a slightly heavier topic, possibly. We have the fight over which uses of AI Europe should outlaw. So we've talked about this a bit before, that currently the EU is working on passing the AI Act, which is a very, very ambitious law to legislate a lot of things related to protecting the rights of EU citizens where it relates to AI. And this article goes over kind of some of the recent conversations happening about the specifics of which application should be outlawed as it's kind of gearing out into the lobbying and amendment phase. So it gives one example of this system called eye border control, which analyzed facial movements to attempt to see if someone was lying, and that was very controversial. So that's one example where there are groups lobbying to ban these sorts of lie detection systems based on AI.
And a bit on the legal details. So the first draft that was released in April 2021, the AI Act, this draft of the AI Act, it actually listed that a couple of things were banned. Social credit scores were banned, and real-time use of facial recognition in public places would also be banned. And now it's labeled emotion recognition and AI lie detectors for border or law enforcement as high risk. And so deployments would actually have to be listed in their public registry in order to be allowed.
Yes. So, yeah, very much an ongoing important process. Lawmakers will be filing these amendments in the coming months, and then they'll be voting on them by late 2022. So there's going to be seemingly thousands of potential amendment proposals about these sorts of questions of what should be allowed and what should be outlawed. And so we should be able to probably get this wrapped up by mid-2023 or maybe late 2023. So this AI Act is moving forward, which is interesting.
Yeah, the rest of the world is watching what the EU does. And they said they actually already have 3,300 amendment proposals to the AI Act already. So lots of amendments, lots to review in terms of what's considered high or low risk or what's considered violation or not. And onto our lightning round. Waymo, UPS, others pressure Governor Newsom to allow autonomous trucking in California. So a host of different companies, Waymo, Aurora, UPS, and Luminar, are among a group of 34 autonomous vehicle developers, California business organizations, and automotive and logistics companies that actually signed an open letter sent to Governor Gavin Newsom on Monday, asking him to revisit the ban on operating autonomous trucks in the state of California. And that ban was in 2015.
Yeah, it's interesting that there is such a ban, I think, because autonomous trucks are much more seem much more likely to become a thing before autonomous cars, as far as we know.
Definitely from the technological point of view, yes.
Yeah.
And even from an economic point of view. So we'll see where that goes. Next article is more and more CS students are interested in AI, and there aren't enough lecturers. So CS departments across different universities across the U.S. actually don't have enough lecturers to teach the increasing need and demand for AI by students. And this report is coming from CSET, the Center for Security and Emerging Technology.
Quite easy to believe, given our experience from Stanford.
Very easy to believe. I believe everyone who can teach is also clamoring for other things or getting offered other things. So.
Yeah, some of the main CS classes at Stanford have 800, 900 students,
right.
Teams of dozens of teaching assistants. It's kind of crazy.
It is.
And on to the other stories here. We have U.S. safety regulators open special investigation into cruise AV crash. So interesting news about cruise aside from what we just covered at the beginning. So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has opened this special investigation into a crash in San Francisco involving a cruise vehicle that resulted in minor injuries. And this was, I believe, just a month ago. So not so good news for cruise between these various stories we've covered.
Not so great.
And last up, we have a story from the Register about how people who regularly talk to AI chatbots often start to believe they're sentient, says the CEO of Replica. So Replica is an app that allows users to design their own so-called virtual companions, basically AI chatbots. And many people actually use the service. I think it's in the thousands or hundreds of thousands, potentially. And yes, we've seen stories before, and here the CEO is again repeating that often people form pretty intense emotional connections to these chatbots. In this case for Replica, but there's been other examples like Show Ice and others.
I think they've actually had millions of downloads, which is pretty impressive during the pandemic.
Yes, exactly. And I think they do monetize quite a bit to be able to flirt and go inappropriate with Replica.
That's
so
right.
They do appeal, I think, to a pretty certain demographic of potentially lonely people, which, I guess it's good to be less lonely.
And on to our fun and neat section. First article is Experiments and Explorations, Robots as Musical Instruments. And this is a YouTube video of an artist in residence, Katie Kwan, who is, joining the Everyday Robotics team for a little bit to do an experiment that makes these robots actually turn into musical instruments in a way. and she dances with them, actually. And this is mapping the joint velocities of the robot onto musical tracks, so the robot can make music while it moves. And the movements kind of map onto their joints when they do move. And Katie is dancing along with them in the YouTube video.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed. It's like 50 seconds of video, which isn't much, but there was also a blog post which had a lot more context, and I found pretty interesting. The artist is actually also a roboticist, so she has danced with 8 different robots from around the world and is now pursuing her PhD in mechanical engineering at Stanford, and has been this artist in residence at Everyday Robotics. And Everyday Robotics is subsidiary of Alphabet, working on getting robots to perform everyday chores, in Google offices and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting to see this very technical person also using robots in this way.
Wish they did some intense dancing, twerking. Just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember the Boston Dynamics dancing video,
that was fun.
Yeah, this is a little more on the artsy, kind of slow, pretty side. Yeah, so would have been nice to see a bit more on that front, but cool to see this artist in residence. And on to our last story, another fun one. We have cute desktop robot designed to keep armchair engineers engaged. So this is a little article about a Kickstarter project, which is by Taiwan's Newsom Robotics. And this Kickstarter is about a cute little robot companion called the Robot Creator DX, which is a sort of build-it-yourself kit with which you can build, I would say, quite cute desktop robot. And it also comes with some programming tools and other things to kind of bring it to life, similar to something like Lego Mindstorm or other kits with robotics.
So you can customize its expression and its look. So there's like a little, piggy one, a little cat one. So yeah, it's pretty cute. Would you want such a companion, Andre?
I would be into it. It is cute, and there's a simple click and drag kind of programming interface, so you can, create some fun custom interactions with it. It does cost $600 in the Kickstarter, so maybe a little bit outside my budget for something like this, but certainly I do think I could have some fun with it. And a child, if they could get such an expensive gift, could have a lot of fun with this too. Yeah,
and that number will only go down, so we'll see. And that's already pretty cheap for the robot, right?
It is. 600 is not too bad, and this one doesn't have too much going on. So it has a little screen and can tilt its head some and maybe move around a bit. But still, it can do. It has a screen on which can display different faces, do speech recognition, move its little hands, stuff like that. So, kind of bringing back a bit of the social robotics stuff we saw from prior years.
Cool. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. You can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai.
As usual, we do ask you to please share with your friends who are interested in AI if you like the podcast. And we would also appreciate a review if you are a big fan. I noticed recently we got a couple more 5 stars
Woo!
On Apple. That's cool. Yeah, we appreciate if you don't write anything and just give us a score. You're now at 23. So that's,
wow.
Feels nice to see that number go up. I'm not going to lie. The more reviews we get.
So sad.
Yeah, I don't know how you can take back a review. That would definitely be sad. So yeah, we'd appreciate it. And do that or not, but please do keep tuning in.